Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to the Psychology of Language. I am Ark Verma from ID Kanpur. We are in week 7 of the course. In this week we are talking about the neural basis of different aspects of language. Let us talk in this lecture about neural basis of comprehension. We've talked about meaning per se, but we're going to talk about how words are processed, whether they are coming from the written modality or they are coming from the auditory modality. So this is what we are going to talk about in today's lecture. Now, as I was also discussing in the last class, while we receive input from different linguistic modalities, that is either spoken or written, the brain will have to adopt a different strategy for different kind of input. So, the spoken input versus the written input, there will be some difference. If you remember, I think in one of the earlier classes I have talked about it. The written input needs to be converted into a sound based representation and then goes to meaning, whereas the auditory input is already in the sound based form and probably will have a faster access to meaning. So, in that sense, how is the brain dealing with this? However, also say for having said that, the auditory input also has to be sort of it goes through that entire perceptual analysis process anyways before you can use that to comprehend or understand the meaning of the word. For the auditory modality, again let us just do a little bit more detail. For the auditory modality, the listener first has to perform a detailed acoustic analysis on the incoming input stream, speech stream or auditory stream, and translate the input to a phonological code. So, what are these sounds made up of? You analyze the sounds and then you kind of come to the phonological code in order to match the same with the lexical access, the lexical representations in the mental lexicon. So, this matching is called lexical access. You do activation, selection, integration, all of those kind of things. Now, there are these three kind of lexical processes that we talked about: lexical access, selection and integration. They take their course in sequence to eventually lead to somebody understanding the meaning of whatever the word is said. For the visual modality, the analysis starts from analyzing the written symbols or the orthography to begin with then either directly which will then say for example the visual symbols, which will then directly be mapped to the lexical representations directly. Say for example, if you remember the dual root cascaded model, there were two routes. One was the grapheme phoneme conversion rule and the other was the direct route. So, either once you have analyzed and you have got the spelling, directly you read say for example irregular words like bouquet and genre and so on, are they directly matched with the lexical representations, or you do the grapheme to phoneme conversion, you convert written to the sound and then kind of match it. So, both of these things are done. Once this is done, once you have this output, you will perform lexical access, selection and integration. Okay. So, that happens. This is sort of a schematic of how the representation of concepts involved in spoken and written language comprehension might be. You will see the conceptual system is one, however you will see the spoken and the written words are kind of going through different routes. So, you will see the spoken word goes to acoustic analysis, converts into phonological code, then auditory word form is activated and moves further. The written word goes through visual analysis, then it either needs to get converted from the orthographic code to phonological code and will move through, or it can directly the orthographic code can activate the visual word form directly, and then the processes are same. Lexical access, selection and integration are all the same processes, which by the way are negotiating with the mental lexicon. So, that is how basically you will come across or negotiate words, whether you are listening to them or you are reading them. Now, going into a little bit more detail, let us talk about processing speech. As a listener, the listener basically, as a listener you probably have to do a variety of processes. Say for example, as a listener we listen to variety of sounds from the environment. You have to distinguish the speech sounds from the other kinds of sounds. Once you have distinguished that, you have to further analyze the speech sounds. The speech sounds are made of basic sounds called phonemes, and the listener needs to distinguish one phoneme from the other, and also the listener basically needs to recognize the phonemes that are relevant to their language. If you remember, when you are talking about this in the chapter on development, we are talking about that initially infants have this capability of perceiving what are called non-native phonemic contrasts. So, they can distinguish between phonemes of any language. Kikuyu children could distinguish between phonemes of English, for that matter, which language which they would never exposed to. Gradually, when they grow up, this generic phonemic distinguishing ability goes away, the generic perception of non-native phonemic contrasts goes away, and the skills with respect to the same language kind of sharpen up and get better and better. So, this is what people are doing. This, by the way, part of being able to distinguish between particular phonemes was, as you know, referred to as categorical perception. Now, the problem actually can be fairly challenging. I mean, we have talked about this in some detail as well, because infants start from being able to perceive differences between any, so we have talked about this from any phonemes from across languages to the specific phonemes that belong to this language, and this kind of is a very specific skill. Even once the infants have kind of gotten how to perceive phonemes and what are the basic sounds of the language, they also still have to deal with some of the other factors, things like variability. Variability in terms of the same speaker in different situations might speak differently, the physical signature of the sound will be very different. Also, the same sound across different speakers might come out as very different, and the infants really have to figure that out. So, there is a lot of variability with which the infants have to deal with in terms of listening to speech. There are also things like co-articulation effects, say for example, spin versus spoon, the sound of sir and the sound of per kind of get the sounds will get slightly modified. So, as you know, we do not really speak in isolated phonemes, we speak phonemes together. So, do, d, those kind of things, and the idea is that, say for example, based on what sounds a particular phoneme is being produced with, based on what phonemes a particular phoneme is being co-produced with, the physical signature changes. So, therefore, these are referred to as co-articulation effects. And you will see that a lot in normal language, and normally when people talk to each other, they reduce some things, they extend some things, the extent is changed, all on the basis of what exactly was being said. So, you have to kind of look at the whole utterance as unit. Also, there was this whole problem of the segmentation problem. If you remember, we talked about metrical segmentation, prosody based segmentation, that is, we talked about statistical segmentation. So many of these things we have talked about. Segmenting the continuous speech stream into meaningful units, that is basically what I am talking about. Now, I am just revising what listening to speech might be, and we talked about prosody. So, the information that the listener derives from the rhythm of the speech, the pitch of the speaker's voice, all of that, remember metrical segmentation. So, metrical segmentation was what? Metrical segmentation was there are so many different words in the language, some of them which have trochaic stress based pattern or iambic stress based pattern. Trochaic is bottle, baby, first syllable is stressed, the second syllable is unstressed. Or versus you could have guitar, iambic, the first syllable is smaller and the second syllable is longer. In English, more than 70% of the words are trochaic, whereas a few words are iambic. This can be used to distinguish between the word pauses and the word boundaries. So, we did all of that already, and in that sense we know that this is a fairly difficult task. So, we have to see which areas of the brain are doing it. So, let us now look at which areas of the brain are helping us do phoneme perception, or which areas of the brain are helping us figure out word boundaries and so on. Now, to begin with, what really happens is when the auditory signal first lands on the ear, it is handled by the general auditory pathways of the brain. Okay. So, there are particular pathways in the brain which are basically tuned to listen to whatever sounds are being created. These areas are basically one of the most important areas are the Heschel's gyri. So, a gyrus is that is that bulge in the brain. We will look at the figures of the brain very shortly. So, we hold on for the moment. So, Heschel's gyri on the supratemporal plane on the temporal lobes, superior and medial to the superior temporal gyrus in each hemisphere. So, left hemisphere, right hemisphere, these are the regions basically which contain the primary auditory cortex, are basically dedicated to this auditory processing. Whatever you are hearing, speech sounds, non-speech sounds, anything that you are hearing, first goes into this area. So I could kind of try and broadly draw this. I don't know whether it will make a lot of sense. Broadly this is the area that I am talking about. Okay. So areas that are around the Heschel's gyri progress into the superior temporal sulci at the top, and they are together known as the auditory association cortices. So where all the auditory information is integrated with other kinds of information that are coming in. It has been shown that Heschel's gyri of both hemisphere, the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere, are activated by speech sounds and non-speech sounds to the same level, but the activation in the superior temporal sulcus of both hemispheres is affected by whether the incoming auditory stimulus is a speech signal or not. So at the superior temporal sulcus is a sort of a difference being made between speech sounds and non-speech sounds. So this is the region of the brain which is kind of telling you, okay, now I know that this is a speech sound, now I know this is the sound of a motor or the sound of a car going by or a car horn or anything. Further from the Heschel's gyri, move slightly further towards the anterior and the posterior portions of the superior temporal sulcus, the brain gets more and more specialized for processing speech. This is where you are analyzing the incoming speech stimulus or incoming auditory stimulus to get in more and more characteristics of speech out of there. What is this? What are the basic phonemes? How are those phonemes linked? What is the, what all of those kind of things are there. It seems that the posterior portion of the superior temporal sulcus, although more towards the left side, are important for processing phonological information as to what is this particular phoneme, how are these particular phonemes linked. Also, some research done by Carl Wernicke, he reported that patients with lesions in the left temporoparietal region, so temporal and parietal, left temporoparietal region, including the superior temporal gyrus, usually had difficulty in understanding spoken and written language both. So that part is where you probably are kind of doing some meaning related stuff. Now there is another very interesting set of studies done by Binder and colleagues, and they did this in the year 2000. They wanted to kind of look at how the brain responds to speech sounds and non-speech sounds. So they exposed participants to these different kinds of speech sounds, from the white noise which had no systematic frequency violations to sounds which had different kinds of frequencies. So for example, from 50 Hz to 2400 Hz. Even reverse speech as well. So different kinds of semantic, different kinds of auditory stimuli were there. Now what did they find basically is that areas that were more sensitive to speech were near the ventrolateral, slightly near the bottom and there is the lateral part, near the superior temporal sulcus. I will show you the figure shortly, and mostly lateralized to the left hemisphere. So things that are more sensitive to speech are more in the left hemisphere. Further, it was also shown that these areas are not really involved. So this area is not really initially involved in meaning or lexicosemantic processing. They are not talking about word status and so on. On the other hand, they found that the posterior portions of the superior temporal gyrus were activated by non-speech sounds as well. So that is a generic area that is processing sound, but these areas, the ventrolateral areas near the superior temporal sulcus, are probably doing some specialized processing as far as speech is concerned. Binder further proposed, on the basis of their finding, that there is this they proposed a sort of a model, and the model was like that processing of input word form first starts at the anterior portion of the superior temporal gyrus and moves on from there to more specialized processing. So the first stream of auditory information according to this model put forward by Binder and colleagues in 2000 is that it moves from Heschel's gyri to the superior temporal gyrus, and here no differentiation is made between non-speech and speech sounds. First then get separated in the adjacent medial portion of the superior temporal sulcus, though no lexicosemantic processing or meaning related processing is happening. Moving further on, so at Heschel's gyri, the sound, the auditory stimuli is first registered, no difference between speech and non-speech. Moving further around the superior temporal sulcus, difference is made between speech and non-speech. Moving further from the superior temporal sulcus, information to the final stages of word recognition is kind of happening in the middle temporal gyrus and the inferior temporal gyrus, finally moving towards the angular gyrus, and which is slightly towards the posterior of the temporal regions. Okay. So what I am talking about? Temporal lobe, middle temporal gyrus and inferior temporal gyrus, and basically towards the back of the temporal regions as well. So let us look at this. This is the model. You can look at this part is the frontal cortex, This one is the superior temporal sulcus, the ridge is the superior temporal sulcus, as I said. This is the superior temporal gyrus. So, what are these areas are basically, this is where things are actually happening. So, this is where, if you look at the arrows, this and this and this is where the entire processing is happening. What does this model say? Acoustic sensitivity decreases moving anteriorly and posteriorly away from the primary auditory cortex. So, this is your primary auditory cortex. If you move further or if you move backwards, the sensitivity to speech sound is gradually decreasing. Anterior and posterior regions of the superior temporal sulcus. So, this is the superior temporal sulcus. The anterior regions and posterior regions of the superior temporal sulcus are increasingly speech specific. So, this is where speech specific analysis is happening. Okay. And then the Heschel's gyrus, which is the primary auditory cortex, the red spot, this one here, it is also not speech specific, but is instead activated by all auditory input. So, the input is first coming here, and then from here it is going towards the back, and also from here it is going towards the front. Okay. And from here it is going to the frontal cortex as well. This is basically the prefrontal cortex, this area here. So, this is something that is happening. So, this is basically what is happening with respect to speech processing according to Binder and colleagues. Now, they also kind of show in a figure slightly differently that how this difference is being made. So, if you in these figures, if you look at, say for example, areas that are more sensitive to tones than noise, you can see the areas like this which are more specific, more sensitive to non-speech sound versus other kinds of things. And in yellow you can see the areas that are more sensitive to speech than tones, and in the orange these areas you can see that these areas are more sensitive to speech sounds and tones than noise. So, three kinds of things were there: just white noise, tones which had different kinds of frequencies, and then you have speech sounds. Here you can exactly see in the left part and the right part exactly which are the areas where basic processing is happening. These slices that you see are basically referred to as the sagittal slices. The idea is you take the brain and you cut it in this portion, and then you kind of, it's, you can imagine as a cabbage, and you have cut the entire cabbage. The middle part is basically the sagittal slice. Lateral is slightly further front, and the medial is slightly inside. Then here in this diagram what you can see is, you can see the regions that are involved in the hierarchical processing for speech. So, this is again basically the Heschel's, you can see the Heschel's gyri, you can see the primary auditory cortex which is in purple. You can see the areas that are more sensitive to tones slightly further in the temporal lobe on the top, areas that are sensitive to words than non-words. The areas that are doing meaning is more in this part, the green areas. Okay. And then basically what you are seeing also is the areas in yellow that are most sensitive to speech than non-speech. So, speech non-speech difference is being made here. Now, this is typically what is happening with respect to auditory speech. Let us look at what happens with respect to written words when you are reading. As noted earlier, reading involves recognizing visual patterns and is a fairly recent development on the evolutionary time scale. Is not something that we were designed to do. It's something that is almost completely man-made. We started drawing particular symbols, and we started attaching those symbols to particular sounds, and then we kind of linked those sounds to specific meanings. So, this is something that we've kind of picked up fairly recently, or actually it's probably the other way around. We have these words, the words are made of these sounds, and the symbols are ways to represent those sounds. They are another way of communicating. Now, reading therefore is also a skill that you're not born with. It is something that you acquire by instruction. Children need to go to school and need to be taught how to read and write. Okay, as opposed to speaking, which people, if everything is normal, eventually do. Now, readers basically have this extra task of linking these arbitrary visual symbols, the scripts, to form based representations or to form sound based representations. So, say for example, if I were to write CAT, typically if I am an illiterate person, these figures will not really mean much, but I have to kind of make a sound based representation on the basis of that. So, C stands for K and A stands for A and T stands for T, and I have to concatenate all of this, link this together and make a representation cat, and then there is obviously a meaning attached to this particular representation. So, the visual so this is basically what a reader has to do as opposed to a listener. Now, the visual symbols also, if you look at the nature of the script, may drastically differ across different kinds of writing systems. We have talked about that: alphabetic, syllabic, logographic writing systems. English typically is the alphabet, is a typical example of an alphabetic script, where Chinese uses the logographic kind of system. Okay. Regardless, however, of the writing system, the reader's first job is to be able to analyze the primitive features, say for example the shapes of the symbols, that may for example involve visual analysis of vertical lines, horizontal. So, the scripts are made up of, the symbols are made up of so many different kinds of features. So, there are dots, there are vertical lines, there are horizontal lines, slanted lines, curved lines. A reader has to figure out all of this, connect this and see what it stands for. Several proposals obviously have been made as to how the brain might be doing this, how we might be doing this as people. And one of the older or earlier models, or the first models on this, was Oliver Selfridge's the Pandamonium Model. And in Selfridge's Pandamonium Model, the idea is that there is the sensory input R, and the sensory input basically is very quickly captured by iconic memory, the vision based memory, by something called an image daemon. So, he basically says that Selfridge is basically looking at components as daemons which achieve a particular task. So, there is an image daemon which kind of captures the image of the symbol from the iconic memory, and then goes on to analyzing it further. The further analysis is basically done by the feature daemons, and they came up with a list of, let us say, 28 features that are possible. So, they are talking, so he proposed 28 feature daemons, and each feature daemon is actually sensitive to one kind of feature. So, one feature daemon could be of horizontal line, one feature daemon could be of a vertical line, one feature daemon could be of a curve, and so on. So, each sensitive to a particular feature, they start to decode the features present in the iconic representation. So, the image daemon tells, okay, these are the features present in this particular iconic representation, eye based or visual representation, and basically the feature daemons tell, okay, this feature present, this feature present, this feature present. Once the featural analysis is there, then you can kind of go to the whole letter level, and whatever the letter representation is, then finalized by the cognitive daemon. So, it says, okay, this is the letter that might be represented in the input. There are and many similar cognitive daemons cognitive daemon can come up with so many different ideas that, okay, all of this is letters contain these features. So, one of them has to be selected, and that selection has to be done by the decision daemon. So, it kind of is very familiar, I am sure. Now, this simplistic model that this Pandamonium model is, it has mostly been criticized because it is a very serial, no feedback, no interaction kind of model. Okay, and it cannot really explain a lot of effects like the word superiority effect and so on. So, this is basically what the diagram, what the model looks like. You can see R is the stimulus input, which is the image daemon. Then you have these feature daemons which are kind of coding for what are the features present in R. So, you can see, say for example, for R there is the discontinuous curves thing has a line, right angles have a line, horizontal lines, oblique lines, all of them have some feature. The only thing that is missing is the continuous curve, which probably if it were an O would be present. Similarly, in the cognitive daemon stage, you can see all of those features, all of those letters are activated which have these features. So, D is activated because it has a discontinuous curve and a vertical line, P is activated, and R is also activated. So, then there is a decision daemon at the end which is kind of deciding between what is it a P or a D or an R, something like that. Okay. So, this is one kind of proposal, a very simplistic early proposal in terms of how reading might be happening. Other proposal is the trace model. We've talked about the trace model in some detail, McClellan and Rumelhart 1981 PDP based model. This is what the model looked like. It had feature level, and it has letter level, and it has word level, and there is also some feedback happening between the word level and the feature level. There is no feedback from the letter level and word level and the letter level. There is some feedback also going on, but there is no feedback between the letter layer and the feature layer. I have talked about the trace model a lot in detail in the chapter on word processing, so I am not really going to go in a lot of detail, but the idea is that, say for example, the letters activate the features in which they are, and they deactivate or they try and inhibit the letters in which they are not, and then the letters activate the words in which they are a part of, and they try and inhibit the words they are not a part of, also at the same time trying to inhibit the other letters. So, this kind of interaction is there. Also from the word level, words try and activate or strengthen the activation of letters that they have in their spelling. Say for example, able will try and activate A, but it will not try and activate, it will try and inhibit N, or it will try and inhibit T and G and S. So, this is basically what the model was. I am not again going to talk about this in more detail. Let us talk about the neural substrate. Okay, let us talk about where does the brain come in. Now, it has basically been proposed that the actual identification of orthographic units might actually take place in the occipitotemporal regions of the left hemisphere. What are the occipitotemporal regions? Okay, so the occipitotemporal regions basically are these regions. Okay, this is the region. So, this is the occipital lobe, this is the temporal lobe. So, occipitotemporal regions are broadly these areas, okay, at the juncture of the occipital and the temporal lobe. In early PET studies, Peterson and colleagues basically have contrasted words with non-words, and they found that regions of the occipital cortex that preferred word strings, and these regions were typically put together, lumped together, and mentioned as the visual word form area. So, this broad area which has all of these regions is referred to as the visual word form area. Later studies also contrasted brain activation in response to letters with respect to brain activation with response to faces and visual textures and so on, and it was observed that these regions of this occipitotemporal cortex which were activating preferentially to words, but they are not getting activated by even other faces, visual textures, houses and so on. So, that is also something that strengthened this idea that there is a area of the brain or a region of the brain that is getting activated specific to this particular word form. Okay. So, further studies also showed that this area is also, this is one thing, but the further studies also showed that this area was not really sensitive to either lexical or semantic features of the word. So, they basically only the visual analysis of word category, word status is there. Okay, is this a word? Yes, this will get activated. Okay, the meaning and the other decision might happen later. So, in a combined ERP and fMRI study on healthy persons and patients with callosal lesions, Cohen, Dehan and colleagues, they were trying to investigate this visual word form area in some detail, and it was basically found that through ERPs that the initial visual processing was limited to the early visual areas that contralateral to the visual field. So, early visual areas are basically areas at the back of the brain in the occipital lobe. Next, processing seemed to occur in the left occipitotemporal sulcus. So, the sulcus that is at the joining between the occipital and the temporal area, anterior and lateral to V4. So, this is basically again, so this is probably the region that I am talking about. Okay. Finally, researchers basically, so this area, by the way, the area in the left occipitotemporal sulcus, damage to this area leads to pure alexia. People cannot read at all if this area is damaged. Further, this area has also been reported to also be activated only by pre-lexical forms. So, regardless of the visual field and case of the stimulus. So, just word forms. Finally, researchers have also found that processing for all kinds of word stimuli from either the visual field, so these areas are also basically process all kinds of word stimuli, irrespective of where the input is coming from. If the input is coming from left or the right visual field, this is the area that kind of processes the word stimuli. Okay, and also across scripts. So, whether syllabic scripts are there, alphabetic scripts are there, this area will get activated. this is a sagittal view of the brain. This is where the visual word form area is there. You can see, say for example, the area in the yellow where it is maximum activation for letters and a minimum activation for faces. Okay. So, this is broadly what I had to talk to you about reading or encountering word forms both in the spoken domain and in the visual or the written domain. Thank you.